On the agenda tonight, we're going to be taking a look at Michael Jackson and analysing how low his voice actually was. Hello, Phil here from Wings of Pegasus and welcome to another analysis video. If you enjoy this video, please give it a thumbs up and subscribe. So this is an interesting request because I have seen videos on YouTube that are titled Michael Jackson's real voice and all those kinds of things when they're referring to how low he either spoke or how low he could sing. So what we're going to do is analyse his voice as we normally do with all the other vocalists that we've looked at, and we're going to see how low he sings in his vocal warm-up. And generally in a vocal warm-up you'll go from your lowest note to around your highest note depending on the length of the warm-up. And this is quite an extensive warm-up. It's about 15 minutes in length. I'm just going to take the last section, which includes his lower register, so that we can see exactly where those notes are and compare them to his high notes. So we have the pitch monitoring software up on screen so you can watch Michael's voice if you want to, but let's have a listen. And I'm just going to jump in here because we've already hit our lowest note, which was the B2. With Michael's voice, because this is a vocal warm-up, it doesn't matter. And I know that people will say, oh, he's not hitting the notes exactly right or dead on, because it's a warm-up. You know, you don't use your voice to its maximum and really focus on pitch when you're warming it up. If anything, you want to be a little bit off in order to get the looseness in your vocal cords and not be too strict with it. I mean, the thing is, you want to be strict when it's game time, when you're actually performing in front of people on stage or you're on tour. That's when you're concentrating on hitting the notes. You're not worrying about hitting the notes in the dressing room beforehand because it doesn't matter. You can see how we start on the B2 and he actually pretty much sings the B2 the second time when actually he wanted the C3. But let's have a listen to this again and listen out for this low note. Now, because I've got a lower voice than Michael, I can get that note quite easily, that B2. And when Michael's singing it, you can hear that just because of the nature of his tone, it sounds, rather than and having the body that my sound has in it, because I've got a lower voice, his sounds more like it's a very light sound. Have a listen again. It kind of sits up there a little bit more rather than kind of down with a lot of that chest resonance in there. And you can also hear down at the bottom that there's not really any power there, but he's hitting the notes and it gets a little bit airy actually as he ascends. But the important thing about, you know, gauging his range is that you can tell these notes are quite low for Michael. It's right at the bottom of his range. And the reason that this is important, I mean, if we're looking at the piano, which I'll get up on screen for reference, when we're talking about the B2 that we hit there, this is the B2, and we have it here, and then the C3 will be obviously the semitone up. But you can see that we're at the bottom end of the baritone range. This is the point that when we're talking about the B2, we've got a lot more notes that we could go down by for the bass range. So going you know, you can keep on taking notes even lower, yeah, as I can do because I've got a lower voice. So we already know from hearing Michael's lowest note in this vocal warm-up that his voice sits significantly higher than my voice. So it's something that we can start to gauge, and with everybody else's voice, once you know the notes that you speak in and that you sing in, you can start to gauge where Michael's voice was, and more importantly, when we start to analyze his high notes, where his natural talking voice would sit. But I mean, it's great to listen to Michael warming up, but let's just have a listen on. I mean, there, going up to that A4, you could hear how his tone starts to really brighten up. And when he gets into this A4, and the A4, by the way, is the top end of the male tenor range, he's going up into that in his head voice. And this is the point that throughout these exercises and his warm-up, he's never going into falsetto. It's a really important point to make. He's getting these notes in his head voice. You can hear the clarity and the connection that he's getting with his vocal cords. That the higher he goes, the kind of brighter and more pristine that sound becomes, because he's hitting notes now that are in his head voice. He can hit them really cleanly, so he can access these, and he would be able to belt these out as well in his chest voice. But obviously he's warming up his voice, so he's not going to be taking chest voice up that high. Listen to the clarity on that A sharp. I mean, this is great because it is so clean, and this really tells us that Michael's voice is high. It is naturally high because he's just done a head voice there, C5, top end of the male tenor range, and you know, beyond the top end technically with this classification of an A4. But this C5, he's now going to be going into countertenor range, you know, up as far as the E5, and we'll continue. And maybe if you can listen out for the clarity on the top notes that Michael's getting and comparing that with his low notes, because you'll hear that difference in tone, that it's almost like when he's going up higher, he's got a bit more freedom and his voice wants to be there. And just to point out, we've gone past the E5 top end countertenor range. We're now at the F5, and he keeps going. And just to reiterate what's being said there, that we've got the A flat above high C. This is what I've written on here, high C, the C5, top end of the male tenor range. And when you're talking about classical singing, that's what would be hit in chest voice. But just to give you a guide, that Michael is going well up, you know, past that top end of really high notes, even beyond the E5. As was mentioned there, we had the A, and it's an A flat 5 that he got up to, which is just crazy high. And it's not falsetto, this is his head voice. So he's got access to all of this range, but importantly, it's because his voice is sitting naturally higher. It means that all of this section here, he can just grab this in his head voice if he wants to. And it means that his chest voice, he'll be able to belt these notes out up around A4, B4, C5. I mean, I'd expect him probably, if he wanted to, you know, belt out C5 even above that. And when we're just referencing the noises that he makes and the little squeals and squeaks, for the most part, those are going to be his head voice, you know, he's not doing that in falsetto. So all of these notes up here, this is where all of his squeaks live, and all of those little bits of expression that he throws in really high at the end of songs. You get an appreciation from this vocal warm-up that he's got all of this, you know, at his disposal, just so much range, especially considering when we consider where we started, which if we went all the way back to the B2, we've then got, so B2, B3, B4, and we were at the A flat 5, so the A sharp, and by the way, the G sharp, if you're looking at this and getting confused, the G sharp is the same as an A flat. So when we've got the G sharp, same as A flat, and you've got the A, you've got the A sharp, we've then got the B, which will be here, the B5. So if you wanted to, you could argue that we've got, you know, 3 octaves. If we're starting on the B2 to B5, we've got 3 octaves worth of range going on in this vocal warm-up. So anyway, I mean, just broadly speaking, for a guy to be able to just float up to these notes in head voice without going into falsetto, that is rare. It's not something that every guy can do. In order to get a bit of an idea as to where Michael should have spoken, I can look at my pitch monitoring software here and see that I'm talking in and around kind of D sharp 3. So when we're looking over at our piano, the D sharp 3 is here. So I'm talking at the, you know, middle of the bass range, middle to lower baritone range. So it means that generally, if I was getting into my singing voice, you know, I might sing down here, but for my particular music that I'm into, which is more of a rock sound, I'd be an octave above that. And when you compare it to my lowest notes, which will be probably in and around, you know, F2, when we go to where I'm talking, I'm gonna be, you know, probably roughly about an octave higher. So the notes that I'm hitting when I talk are an octave higher roughly than my lowest note. So if we apply that to Michael's voice, it means that his lowest note, we know, was a B2. So an octave above that would be a B3. So to give you an example of talking on a B3, this is a B3. So if I'm talking in and around this kind of area, which probably, if I'm saying something like that, I went above a B3. So if I was talking in this kind of range, I don't think people would think that I sounded like Michael Jackson, but I'm saying the same notes or speaking the same notes that he probably would be in and around naturally with his voice. So just to give an example of Michael's talking voice from the Barbara Walters interview, we'll have a listen, and I've got the pitch monitoring software on my phone, so I can see exactly where he's talking.
Have as many people want to come can come and enjoy the show. And there's a time where you like to be in private when you put on your pajamas, go to sleep, cut off the light, ding, and lay down. That's your private space. If you go in the park, I can't go in the park.
What's really interesting here is, even there, we went down to about a C3, which is down here. And when I was talking, I said that my voice sits in and around this kind of area. So Michael, I know that that was kind of the lowest point that he got there. But when you listen to his voice, it's because of the tone. I think that when people do an imitation of Michael's voice, they tend to kind of put it up here and put it in head voice and it's all really high. But what people are actually locking in on is the sound of his voice, the tone, because it's thin. So if I'm taking this pitch that I normally talk with and make it a bit thinner like this, I'm still saying exactly the same pitches than I just was, but I've taken out all of the body from the sound. So with Michael, his kind of voice is more like this, but it doesn't mean that it's any different to talking like this when I'm talking. So it's interesting when we're looking at his voice talking, everyone says, oh, you know, Michael's got a high talking voice, and here's him talking with his low voice. His high voice is low, but it sounds high. Just to give an example of this, I'm going to, you know, de-Michael Jacksonify his voice and speak at the same pitch that he's speaking. Let's have a listen.
When I give a concert,
Those are the notes that he just said. When I give a concert, and listen to my voice, listen to where it is. He's not going, and when I give a concert, he's not an octave higher. He's exactly where I'm talking.
I'd like to have as many people want to come can come and enjoy the show.
Enjoy the show. Enjoy the show. It's amazing when you just apply your own voice to it. You realize he's not talking in a really high place. It's just a thinner place.
There's a time where you like to be in private when you put on
Listen to that. You liked it. He even got a little bit heavier with his sound there.
concert. I like to have as many people want to come can come and enjoy the show. And there's a time where you like to be in private when you put on your pajamas, go to sleep.
So he's no. He's there with pitch. So what this shows is that, of course, Michael, when he spoke, he sometimes got quite animated in his delivery as to what he was saying, where his pitch would go up and down. But that's the same for everybody. That's exactly the same way that I'm talking at the moment. But when he's having this interview, he's talking in the same range, in the same place that I'm talking, but his voice is thinner. And it means that because his voice is thinner, I think it's just due to the fact that he can take his voice so high that the bottom sounds thinner than it is. But he is still talking in a normal place. He's not talking in that almost cartoon place of, you know, if people want to come to my gigs, doing something like that. That's not happening in this interview. It's great to see a video that isn't, highlighting or showing Michael's low voice. Nobody's commenting underneath this saying, oh wow, I didn't know Michael spoke so low. They're just commenting on the video. But he's talking in exactly the same place where most guys talk. Let me just address the comments that have come through and will come through from people that say, oh, Michael Jackson was a castrato, and it's exactly what it sounds like back in the day, where boys would get castrated so that they didn't go through puberty, their voices didn't drop, so their voice stayed in that place that was like a contralto, mezzo-soprano, and soprano. So it was a female classification of voice, but they were men or boys that maintained their range there. Of course, Michael Jackson has kids, so it doesn't make sense on any level, but just to address the fact that we are showing here that he talks in a normal range for an adult male, somebody that has gone through puberty and hasn't been castrated, or even chemically. And I know that people have also said, oh, well, no, he had drugs in order to keep his voice higher, but his voice isn't higher. He just has a thinner sounding voice in his range where he talks, but he's got a really high voice. He's got a great range. He can take his voice up higher than most guys would ever be able to do. And that's why he has this slight sound to his voice, this inflection, this tone that sounds higher than it is, because his vocal cords have this natural thinness to them that allow high notes but make lower notes sound higher than they are. Now, I don't want this video to go on for too long, but let's just jump back into the vocal warm-up so we can just see how we end. And really interesting there, I mean, on so many different levels, because you can hear in the example we've kind of got this or ooh. It's kind of a change in vowel. I think that's what we're doing with this exercise. But anyway, you can hear the body and the sound given in the example, and then you get to hear how thin Michael's version of that is. He's trying to do that, but that's what his voice sounds like when he's trying to get body in the sound. This is just his voice. This is just how his vocal cords do it and how they sound, and how his resonance happens, just his natural tone. So it's really interesting to hear as well his vibrato, because the example is quite wide. There's quite a dramatic vibrato going on, but you can see on screen here how short and you know, restricted the pitches with his vibrato. It's actually quite a fast vibrato. And from this, I think that's just a natural thing that happened to his voice when he was younger, and I have done a video on that. His vibrato was slightly slower and slightly wider, but then, you know, as he grew up, his voice then changed, and if anything, became a little bit more mainstream and more pop, because this is what you get. And of course, talking about the king of pop, it makes sense. But that's the kind of vibrato that you get in more mainstream music. In the charts, you'll hear that. You won't hear a slower, wider vibrato in the charts for the most part, because it tends to be a little bit too dramatic for pop songs. So, in conclusion, we can say that Michael, in this video, the examples that we've had, he's speaking in the same kind of place that most guys would speak. Most guys who would then have a baritone, even a high bari voice classification, but he just went way up above that, as we saw in that vocal warm-up. And it might have even been the case that it was something to do with his personality as well. The fact that he was childlike, that he had a less offensive voice, and I mean, it might have been the case that he did that intentionally, and then it just became natural for him to speak in a less offensive way. And when I say that, if I'm talking and just keeping this pitch here and keeping my chest voice there, if I was saying it slightly lighter, this is less offensive, it's quieter, dynamically we've gone down. So it means that people are going to take that voice, you know, a lot less offensively than they would if you're more abrupt and added more chest voice into the sound. So it might be a culmination of his vocal cords, just naturally the way that they came together, the thinness of his tone, but then his personality when you add that all into that. So an interesting investigation for tonight, because I have seen lots of, I haven't watched them all the way through, but I've seen lots of videos that have had the title of, you know, revealing Michael Jackson's low voice and all this kind of stuff, expecting him to, oh, talk down there and be really low. but it's never really like that. All it is just him talking normally, but maybe just having a little bit of a thicker sound rather than the thinner sound that he'd normally speak with. So yeah, he would be able to probably add more body into the sound, but by no means was his voice unnatural, and we have found that with this vocal analysis. So thank you guys for requesting this particular analysis for tonight. I hope you have enjoyed it, and let me know what you guys think, as always, in the comment section below. Keep those requests and suggestions coming, and if you did enjoy this video, please give it a thumbs up and subscribe, and I'll catch you guys at the next one. Rock!